On February 20th, 2026, at precisely 2:18 p.m., Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made his lonesome approach to a podium within the National Press Theatre in Ottawa. He had no aides with him. He had no ministers standing next to him. There was no announced agenda. There had been no preview of PM Mark Carney's bombshell statement. Less than an hour's notice had been given for the news conference. Nevertheless, live broadcasts were already being produced by cameras from every major network in North America and the rest of the world. The Prime Minister was adjusting the microphone and staring straight into the cameras in a crowded, uncomfortable, and completely silent room. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of words that altered everything ensued. Carney calmly and painstakingly recited his remarks straight from the paper. He refused to answer inquiries. He didn't stop for a response or applause. He only said what his nation, a large portion of Trump's response and the impact on relations, had been waiting months for from a Western leader. When he was done, he turned around and left the room without turning around. Within minutes, the video became viral. On all of the world's major social media platforms, it rose to the top of the trending list. Within an hour, world leaders started to respond. In less than 90 minutes, the U.S. president posted a series of messages on social media that turned what had already been a serious diplomatic crisis into something much more dangerous. A complete rupture between the two countries that share the world's longest undefended border. A trade dispute is not what we are witnessing. We are not witnessing a diplomatic dispute between adjacent nations that will be settled with a handshake and a phone call. A connection that has shaped North American security, wealth, and identity for 3 generations is being destroyed. And whether that connection can ever be completely restored, or if February 20th, 2026 will be seen as the day that the American era in North America came to an end, will depend on what transpires in the coming days. You must analyze the wider ramifications for both countries and comprehend the 24 hours leading up to the remark in order to comprehend why Carney selected this particular moment, why he chose these words, and why he decided to deliver them unannounced and alone at a podium. One of the biggest automakers in the world, Toyota, declared early on February 19th, 2026, that it was shifting $9 billion in planned investment from the U.S. to Canada. American manufacturing communities were rocked by one announcement alone. Everything Carney's government had been saying, that Canada was presenting itself as a more stable, reliable, and alluring location for international investment than the increasingly unpredictable United States under the current administration, was directly validated financially and publicly. Trump was immediately incensed by the announcement. He made a post on Truth Social at 11:47 a.m. The bluntness of his words was characteristic. He referred to Toyota's choice as a grave error. When he was finished, he said Canada would be pleading to become the 51st state in the Union. He characterized Canada as a frigid wasteland with a joke economy that only survives because, in his words, we let them sell to us. He concluded, as he always does, by criticizing Canada's leadership as being weak. Sad is a dismissive term. That post landed like a grenade in Ottawa. Prime Minister Carney called an emergency cabinet meeting at 3, according to people familiar with the afternoon's developments. The 2-hour meeting covered political ramifications and public reactions. The usual strategy, which involves a controlled and properly worded diplomatic response through official channels, was advocated by a number of top ministers. They advocated for patience. They advised moderation. They maintained that Canada could afford the risk of openly increasing relations with Washington. According to reports, Carney heard everything and then refused. His logic, as expressed by those in attendance, was straightforward. He maintained that the days of tactful diplomatic reactions were over. He maintained that Trump had made it quite evident through several acts, including the introduction of tariffs that breached existing trade agreements, the breach of obligations, and this most recent public humiliation that the current Washington administration did not consider Canada a partner. It saw Canada as a subordinate, and Carney had made the decision that Canada would no longer tolerate that portrayal. At 6:30 that night, the Prime Minister called a number of people. The leaders of the What's Next for You group were called by him. The S, relations with Canada, Japan, France, Germany, Australia, and the United Kingdom. The calls were short, but important. Carney told each leader that he planned to make a significant public announcement the next day that would radically alter Canada's relationship with the United States. Please understand, he said, he was implicitly requested their assistance. He was informed by all 5 leaders that they comprehended. In different ways, each of the 5 assured him that their nations would support Canada. There is no footnote to this detail. This was the cornerstone of Carney's entire approach. In the most important sense, he wasn't the only one who walked to that stage. He approached the podium with the knowledge that the Western Alliance's main members, Britain, Australia, France, Germany, and Japan, had already subtly indicated their support. He was confident that Canada would remain diplomatically connected, regardless of the outcome. The U.S. would be. Carney briefed his entire cabinet on the closing words the next morning. Please share your ideas in the comments, what he was going to say. He displayed the text to them. Those in the room reported that the room fell silent once he had completed his reading. According to reports, one question was posed by Deputy Prime Minister Christopher Freeland. Was he sure this was the proper thing to do? Carney gave a succinct and decisive answer. He claimed that their relationship as they had understood it was already finished. It had been terminated by Trump. He was just formalizing it. Carney's remarks, which have since been cited in editorial pages, broadcast studios, and parliaments worldwide, were made at 2:18 in the afternoon. The framework that had guided Canadian policy for 3/4 of a century was acknowledged first. He claimed that Canada has functioned for 75 years with the presumption that the U.S. was at the core of the global system. Canada's economy was based on its ability to reach American markets. It had constructed its American alliance-centered security architecture. Supporting American leadership on the international scene had been the cornerstone of its foreign policy. He claimed that this presumption was no longer true. He went on to clearly clarify the conclusions reached by his ministry. The current administration in Washington had demonstrated that it did not appreciate true collaboration by its deeds as much as its words. International accords were not upheld. It disregarded its neighbors' right to sovereignty. These charges were not made out of rage. These were observations that were declared to be true. Then the room was blocked by the line. He asserted that Canada will not wait for America to reaffirm its values. Canada was moving on from the American era as it and the rest of the world had known it. As reporters exploded in questions behind him, he folded his statement, turned away from the podium, and left. He didn't turn around. He didn't stop. He didn't grin or wave to soften the exit. He just walked away. The diplomatic crisis was turned into something even more hazardous 90 minutes later when Donald Trump responded with 4 postings in a row on Truth Social. The first post vowed that this would not stand and accused Carney of declaring war on the United States. In addition to commercial agreements and intelligence sharing arrangements, the second proposed a comprehensive review of all U.S.-Canada accords, including NORAD, the Combined Military Aerospace Defense Command that has safeguarded North American airspace since 1958, increased inspections at all border crossings between the United States and Canada, with the clear implication that it might arrange to be considered like a foreign enemy if it so desired. Then followed the fourth post, which was the first to cross a boundary in the history of these two nations' contemporary relations. Trump spoke directly to the Canadian people, not their government, and told them that the United States was prepared to accept any Canadian province that wanted to join the greatest country in the world, that their government was failing them, and that they deserved better leadership. Take a time to let that land. The U.S. president refrained from questioning Canadian trade policy. He made no threats about more tariffs. He extended an invitation to Canadian provinces to secede from Canada and join the U.S. Economic negotiation is not what this is. This directly contradicts the territorial, the sovereignty and integrity of a neighbor. This type of comment would be regarded as a precursor to something much more serious than a trade disagreement under any other set of circumstances involving any other two countries. On Thursday afternoon, Trump casually shared it on social media. The events that transpired in the hours that followed Carney's remarks and Trump's reply exposed something that the foreign policy establishment in Washington had feared but not entirely expected. The old allies of the United States were ready to support Canada. Britain was the first to respond. Prime Minister Keir Starmer issued a statement at 4:15 p.m. Like other British diplomatic declarations, it was restrained in its wording. Its meaning, however, was clear. According to Starmer, the UK cherished its connections with both Canada and the United States. However, the UK is a staunch supporter of the rules-based international order and the idea that sovereign states should be respected. The statement determined that Canada's concerns were valid and should be taken into consideration. Go through the subtext. Britain simply informed Washington that it was incorrect. This is a serious matter. For a century, America's closest friend in every significant fight has been the United Kingdom. Since World War II, Washington and London's alleged special relationship has served as the cornerstone of Western foreign strategy. A fundamental change in the structure of Western alliances occurs when Britain openly acknowledges Canada's complaints against the U.S., even if they are expressed diplomatically. The European Union then released a statement from its top foreign policy official, stating that Canada and the EU support mutual respect between sovereign countries and global trade standards. The declaration made it clear that unilateral acts that violated international agreements were unacceptable. The implication was obvious once more. Washington was being told by the EU that it had overreached itself. Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, issued a statement reaffirming that Canada and Australia had a stronger cooperation than ever before, and that both countries shared Canada's commitment to sovereign equality and fair trade. In a statement, Japan's foreign ministry said that it understood Canada's stance and that Japan supports ties based on respect for one another. Japan, Australia, the European Union, and Britain. They are not ancillary players in the world system. The main allies of the United States are the nations that have supported Washington during all of the last century's significant crises. They all openly indicated that Canada was correct and that the United States had crossed a line in precisely calibrated but clear diplomatic language within hours of Carney's statement. Because this crisis is framed as a trade disagreement, which fundamentally understates its severity, it is imperative to grasp what is at risk here. There is more to the connection between the U.S. and Canada than just economics. It's a connection of security. The relationship is one of intelligence. The relationship is military in nature. The foundation of this connection is the belief that these two nations share the same ideals, confront the same threats, and will stand by one another in times of need. Although trade flows are significant, they only make up a small portion of the bonds that unite these two countries. The military agency that keeps an eye on the skies over North America and issues early warning of ballistic missile assaults and other aerial threats is called NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Since 1958, it has run constantly. Although its headquarters are in Colorado Springs, all levels of its command structure are completely integrated with Canadian military troops. No American station can match the coverage of the northern approaches to North America provided by Canadian radar facilities in the Arctic. The United States early warning systems have enormous blind areas in the absence of those installations and coverage, blind spots that hostile countries could take advantage of and have studied for decades. When Trump made a threat to Examine the NORAD agreement. Canada was not under danger. He was endangering himself. He was posing a threat to American national security. Even while the president doesn't seem to comprehend this, the generals and admirals who work at the Pentagon do. If anything, the relationship between the military and intelligence sharing is even more important to American security. The Five Eyes Alliance, an intelligence sharing agreement that also includes Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, was founded by the United States and Canada. The intelligence services of the participating countries communicate information so extensively and consistently within the Five Eyes framework that they essentially operate as a single cohesive entity. Information about foreign espionage activities, cyber attacks, terrorist plans, and geopolitical developments is shared among these agencies in real time. It is impossible to overestimate the importance of that information flow to American national security. The United States does not only lose a partnership with Canada if the two countries' intelligence sharing relationship breaks down, if Canadian agencies start to conceal information, or if American agencies are excluded from Canadian intelligence networks. It loses its eyes and ears, which no other arrangement can replace. Both nations become much less secure. However, there is more to lose for the United States, which is the main target of the majority of the dangers that Five Eyes keeps an eye on. The border itself comes next. The length of the U.S.-Canada border is 5,525 miles. It is the world's longest international border. It has been in operation for the whole of contemporary North America. History built on a foundation of confidence. No walls are present. Its entire length is free of military installations. Only at authorized crossings are checkpoints present. Because of the economic and social links that bind communities on both sides of the border, any artificial barrier would have disastrous effects on day-to-day living. There will be immediate and catastrophic repercussions if Trump carries out his threat to treat Canada as a foreign enemy, if he places National Guard troops on the northern border in the same manner that he has placed them on the southern one, if he sets up strong military checkpoints, and if he treats Canadian citizens as potential threats by default. The daily flow of trade over that border will cease to exist. Economic destruction will befall communities that rely on cross-border trade. Additionally, the kindness that has mistrust, animosity, and fear will take the place of what made North America the world's most stable and wealthy region for 8 decades. The best way to characterize the state of affairs inside the federal government in Washington is as controlled chaos. According to reports, the Pentagon is in crisis mode. Senior military officers are attempting to convey to the White House the catastrophic nature of Trump's threats against NORAD and information sharing. These officials have dedicated their careers to researching and safeguarding the North American security architecture. Sources claim that in order to address the NORAD danger, the Secretary of Defense asked the president to meet with him immediately. No date has been set for that meeting as of this writing. The chaos in the State Department is comparable. After decades of establishing and sustaining the U.S.-Canada alliance, career diplomats are rushing to open back channels with Ottawa colleagues in an effort to limit the harm. However, the president's public remarks are consistently undermining them, making it politically hard for Canada to engage in talks without seeming to give in to pressure. It appears to be surrender if Carney meets with Trump now that he has advised Canadian provinces to think about joining the U.S. No leader elected by the Democratic Party can endure that perception. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer released a joint statement urging calm and communication between the two nations in a rare instance of bipartisan cooperation. The statement urged both governments to refrain from escalation while acknowledging that the relationship's present course was concerning. It was a noteworthy occasion. Both of these leaders concur on almost nothing, but there was a big catch to it as well. Executive action on military agreements and border policy cannot be overridden by Congress. Without the consent of Congress, the president can carry out his threats. Schumer and McConnell's statement was an appeal rather than a restriction. Carney's administration in Ottawa is getting ready for every scenario, even the most dire ones. Sources stress that the Canadian military has been placed on heightened alert status because good government necessitates readiness for all eventualities when the language from a neighboring country's leader is this severe, not because anybody in Ottawa anticipates real military war. At the same time, Canada is speeding up discussions on trade agreements, investment frameworks, and security cooperation with its Asian and European allies. Ottawa's message is, sending is obvious and intentional. Canada will form new alliances and partnerships that circumnavigate America completely if the U.S. wishes to treat it as an enemy. Such crises seldom end amicably, according to history. They usually choose one of three paths, and all three are still technically feasible at the moment. Emergency de-escalation is the first scenario. Senior officials from both nations, former presidents and prime ministers, and esteemed elder statesmen step in behind the scenes in this situation. They help Trump and Carney have a private discussion. Both leaders consent to a cooling off period, either in public or in private. Some of the proposed tariff increases are halted by Trump. Carney consents to moderate his public statements. The situation calms down, and the two nations revert to a state of functional cooperation. This is the crucial warning, though. A handshake is insufficient to entirely repair the confidence that has been eroded by the events of the last 48 hours. Even in the best of circumstances, the relationship between the United States and Canada will be irrevocably altered. The partnership presumption that Carney explained in his remarks. The 75-year-old premise that guided Canadian policy is no longer in place. One successful meeting is insufficient to rebuild it. In the second scenario, two neighbors are engaged in a slow-motion Cold War. Neither side backs down in this situation. Tariffs remain in place. The vehement discourse goes on. In the months that follow, the U.S. and Canada essentially cease collaborating on all matters, save those that are specifically mandated by current treaty requirements. Trade volumes sharply decline. Only the most important and urgent danger information is shared. Both parties are unwilling to invest in or grow a relationship they no longer trust, so NORAD continues to operate, albeit at a low level. The border becomes a continual source of conflict, heavily guarded and economically damaging. Communities that rely on cross-border trade start to struggle and eventually fall apart. Neither government is prepared to acknowledge that it erred. As a result, the harm gets worse every year until the deteriorated connection is accepted by a new generation that has never understood what it should be. The rupture is the third possibility. Diplomacy experts on both sides of the border have been working for decades to avert this horrible situation. Trump's threats are more than just threats in this situation. In fact, he suspends parts of the NORAD Accord. In fact, he prevents useful intelligence exchange. In fact, he sends troops to the Canadian border. In response, Canada formally halts all of its collaboration with the U.S. and starts negotiating security alliances with Germany, France, the UK, and other European countries. When Washington and Ottawa clash, America's other allies start weighing their own interests. Canada is a choice for some. Since the end of World War II, the Western Alliance has served as the free world's defining security framework. It starts to break along lines that might never be completely fixed. NATO, which relies on mutual trust and dedication among its members, is dealing with an internal crisis that it was never intended to manage. A time of unparalleled strain is upon the entire system of multilateral collaboration that has maintained stability and prosperity in the Western world for 8 decades. This is not a scene from a thriller about politics. Senior national security authorities in a number of nations are currently actively planning for this eventuality and making backup measures. It's not unimaginable anymore. The next 72 hours will be the most important in U.S.-Canada relations history. There are particular signals to be aware of. Whether a previous American president issues a public call for de-escalation is the first clue. A declaration would have substantial weight and may provide Trump with political cover to back down from some of his more extreme threats, without seeming to concede to Canada, especially if it came from one of Trump's predecessors, especially one who is still respected within the Republican Party. The second indicator is whether Canada responds with any tangible, nonverbal retaliation. Although Carney's message was strong, it was only words. Ottawa is ready to carry out Carney's suggested intentions if it starts rerouting economic relations, if Canadian officials publicly halt particular cooperative agreements, or if the Canadian military makes any noticeable adjustments to its operational posture. The third and most important indicator is whether Trump retracts his pledge to examine the NORAD Pact in particular. All the other aspects of this catastrophe are recoverable. It is possible to renegotiate trade agreements. Tariffs are modifiable. The use of diplomatic language can be retracted. NORAD, however, is unique. The cornerstone of North American security is NORAD. There may be irreparable harm to the security relationship and American credibility as an alliance partner with every other nation on the planet if the U.S. government formally calls into question that commitment. Standing at a stage, Mark Carney declared, "The American era is over." In response, Donald Trump proposed that Canadian provinces join the U.S. The closest allies of the United States openly supported Canada. The Pentagon is in a panic. There is anarchy at the State Department. Leaders in Congress are worried but helpless. The moment that foreign policy specialists and historians have been cautioning about for years has arrived more quickly than nearly anyone had predicted. The point at which the pressures on the U.S. international system were too much to handle diplomatically, language and handled conflict. When a neighboring nation pushed to the breaking point by an administration that sees agreements as roadblocks and partners as enemies, rose up and said enough. Whether the relationship between the United States and Canada has changed fundamentally is no longer the question. It has. That occurred as soon as Carney left the National Press Theatre without answering any questions.